My lion diet made it to the Mayo Clinic. Kind of, not exactly in the way I hoped. Last October, the Mayo Clinic published an article written by a registered dietitian calling the carnivore diet and the lion diet another new fad diet and warning people of the dangers. This kind of thing makes the conspiratorial side of me think these large institutions might be getting worried about how effective these dietary interventions are. It's either that, or it's prideful stupidity on their part. It's probably prideful stupidity on their part. I thought I'd respond because if you're someone who's curious about the carnivore or the lion diet as a treatment modality for untreatable illnesses, and you see an article like this coming from a prestigious organization like the Mayo Clinic, it can be confusing and no wonder. So I'm going to break down the article. The article starts by calling the lion diet a fad diet. Meat diets are one of the oldest diets of all time. We've been eating meat forever. Many physicians and scholars have mentioned meat-based diets throughout human history, dating back to the 1500s. In the early 1900s, I like this example, Arctic explorer Vilhelmur Stephenson documented the Inuit tribe who was eating primarily meat and fat, and he was shocked by that at the time. And then in the 1920s, he decided to give the diet a try himself for 1 year under medical supervision and saw improvements in many areas of health with no reported side effects. That's all documented. Ketogenic diets were used to treat epilepsy until anti-epileptics came into play, which have a host of side effects, and people kind of forgot about ketogenic diets for a while. The reemergence of ketogenic diets, the lion diet is a ketogenic diet, is not a fad. The carnivore diet has been gaining traction since 2017. Brushing a plant-free ketogenic diet off as a fad diet when there's active research being done into ketogenic diets rather than researching said plant-free ketogenic diet is not a good long-term plan for the Mayo Clinic. Given the thousands and thousands and thousands of anecdotal success stories and people who have been on the diet now, like me, for 6 years, monitoring their health for, like I said, over half a decade, it turns out the Mayo Clinic article is mainly based on my website, liondiet.com, which I'm kind of honored by, honestly, but it attempts to pick it apart. And the author of this article calls out the website's claim that the lion diet seems to put illnesses into remission, saying that these types of statements, especially without any links or references to peer-reviewed literature, not only confuse readers, but potentially put their health at risk by encouraging an unsustainable, unproven, and unbalanced diet. Now, saying that the lion diet puts illnesses into remission is a bold claim, I admit. And if you look at my website, I explain that with autoimmune disorders in particular, leaky gut is common, and the easiest way to reduce the allergenic food particles leaking into your body because of the leaky gut is to only eat meat. That seems to heal the gut and reduce inflammatory responses from the food particles leaking through the gut. It's not that complicated. And I wouldn't have that claim up, except the evidence it works is overwhelming at this point. It's insane. The Facebook group I have with 18,000 people in it speaks for itself. It would be amazing if an actual institution like the Mayo Clinic could look into eating only ruminant meat and salt and water and look at what it does for people. So I'm just waiting for that to happen still. The ketogenic component of it seems to be beneficial for psychiatric disorders. Chris Palmer is doing a lot of research. He's from Harvard into that. I guess they haven't heard of that. It's amazing for weight loss. It seems to work insanely well for autoimmunity. I would like more research to be done as soon as possible. I'm not happy that there's a lack of research. I think it just shows that the research that's funded easily isn't diet research, it's research that promotes a pharmaceutical treatment. The part that's really worth pointing out is the request for links to peer-reviewed literature. I think it's absolutely insane for the Mayo Clinic, which bases most of its dietary health stances on epidemiological research, to call out a website with 5 pages of success stories of people using the carnivore diet and the lion diet for their autoimmune conditions. Perhaps the appropriate response would be running a study, which I've begged some sort of medical institution to do for years. See my TEDx talk that TEDx wouldn't post. Run the studies, please, seriously. Figure out why this works and help people. A research institution pointing out that there's not enough research rather than doing the research is ridiculous. Quick pause before I continue my rant. If you guys are looking for doctors that will actually help you, check out MERC Health. I get my blood work done through them, and I'm a big proponent of blood work. I'm also not against doctors if you can find one that knows what they're doing. That's part of the reason I use MERC Health. I had my hormones tested in depth last year when I got exposed to mold, and they were tanked. They obviously recovered because I got pregnant right after I moved out of the house. Then this year I had them redone, although breastfeeding kind of messes with them. So I'm going to be testing again soon. Well, not that soon, but once I'm done breastfeeding. The doctors at MERC are incredibly knowledgeable. The tests are way more in depth than what you'll get at a regular doctor's office. And after they do their thorough testing, they talk to you and go through your results. They send you what your results mean, which is really helpful. And they suggest ways to optimize your health. That includes hormones, peptides, supplements, diet, lifestyle, everything that should be actually discussed with a doctor. My husband's had his hormones tested through them. My dad uses them. They're super easy to work with and actually helpful. You can go to merchealth.com/Mikhaila and use code MP for 10% off hundreds of labs you can get tested. You can get the exact in-depth hormonal panel if you want that I had done. It's definitely something to get tested as a man or a woman because these days people's hormones are all over the place. Back to the rant. As for the lack of evidence for this diet, at some point, anecdotes start turning into evidence if you have enough of them, and we're at that point. People wouldn't stick to this ridiculous diet of only eating meat if it didn't work. It's not that much fun restricting your diet down to just meat. It's actually very difficult, especially in the beginning, and especially if you're battling chronic illness at the same time. For people to stay on it long term, it would need to be incredibly effective in order to be worth the sacrifice of losing foods you love. It's not some weird political stance people are taking. It's hard. And people stick with it long term. The author also infers that I make money from my Amazon list linked on the website, which links the air fryers and cooking supplies I use, which is ridiculous. I cannot think of a worse get-rich-quick scheme than linking air fryers through Amazon by promoting an all-meat diet. The article also complains about my use of the term leaky gut. This bothered me the most, I think, out of the entire article. She explains that, and I quote, while leaky gut doesn't exist, gut permeability does. And while there's no way to test for it, the Mayo Clinic is coming up with a test for it. First of all, leaky gut is gut permeability. Naturopaths have been using the term leaky gut for decades, and while it's a bit informal, it's the same thing as increased gut permeability. As for tests that she says don't exist, there are tests that exist that do a pretty good job of measuring leaky gut, like MMP9 levels and zonulin levels. But ignore those and promote the new Mayo Clinic test, even though leaky gut doesn't exist, but gut permeability does. That makes sense. The author says the lack of fiber, calcium, and vitamin D on a carnivore diet and the increase in saturated fat doesn't agree with the USDA dietary guidelines for Americans, which, if you look around, are going swimmingly. Let's remember that the dietary guidelines have already been publicly outed for having a large portion of their board consisting of practitioners with plant-based and big food ties. This also completely avoids the fact that both calcium and vitamin D are found in meat. In fact, the form of vitamin D found in meat, D3, is actually the superior and more bioavailable form of vitamin D compared to D2 found in plants. D2 from plants has to be converted to D3 in the body and does so at a poor rate. Vitamin D3 is what your body wants, and you can get it straight from meat. As for fiber, when you look at the research, it turns out that the benefits are a little less clear than what's often interpreted and presented to the population. There's actually quite a bit of evidence suggesting there are situations where consuming less of it is beneficial, like in situations where people are dealing with gut health issues. A study that divided subjects into a high, low, or zero fiber diet found that the patients who completely stopped consuming fiber actually increased their bowel frequency from once every nearly 4 days to once every day. Subjects on the high fiber diet saw bowel frequency get worse, with bowel movements coming every nearly 7 days. All of the individuals on the high fiber diet continued to experience bloating. 69% of the low fiber participants and 100% of the no fiber participants completely eliminated their bloating. Diverticulitis, which my mom had, is a digestive disorder estimated to affect nearly 2.5 million people in the US. A study in over 2,000 patients with diverticulitis found that the patients dealing with the worst degrees of diverticulitis were the ones consuming the most fiber. I could do this for a while. I'll wrap it up shortly. As for saturated fat, it's important to point out that we have no definitive evidence showing that saturated fat is actually harmful. This is true. What we have is epidemiological research showing that people who eat more red meat and drink more alcohol, smoke, and consume a standard American diet have an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. That's not science. We also have research showing that some people respond to increased saturated fat intake with elevated LDL levels, which research has also failed to show actually increases mortality risk. The author then goes on to say that the lack of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and plant-based proteins on a carnivore diet will prevent a person from getting enough nutrient-dense foods in their diet. What the author is missing here is an understanding of bioavailability, or how well a nutrient is absorbed. It's well established that many nutrients are better absorbed when they come from meat versus plants. For example, vitamin A is 15 to 20 times more bioavailable in meat compared to plants. Heme iron from meat is 3 times more bioavailable than non-heme from plants. K2 from meat is better absorbed than K1 from plants. Zinc is better absorbed from meat than plants because anti-nutrients in plants can interfere with zinc absorption. EPA, DHA are only found in meat. Plants have ALA, which has to be converted to EPA and DHA, and does so at a low rate of like 5 to 10% for EPA and 2 to 5% for DHA. Vitamins D, E, K, and A are better absorbed in meat because they're fat-soluble vitamins, meaning they require fat for absorption. The Mayo Clinic author also claims that there's an increased risk of heart disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cancer from consuming red meat, which we've all heard for decades. The problem, again, is that all of these claims are rooted in epidemiological research and lack any real clinical evidence to support them. Just because some observational studies show that people who eat more hamburgers and hot dogs have an increased risk of chronic disease doesn't mean red meat is to blame. It would be lovely to see some actual meat studies that ruled out the buns and junk food consumed with meat done. To give the author an ounce of credit, she does say that eliminating alcohol, added sugar, and ultra-processed foods can help decrease gut inflammation. She also says to avoid any foods that you're allergic or sensitive to, but then goes on to say that an anti-inflammatory diet should include fruits, vegetables, and healthy fats. The problem with this goes back to leaky gut or increased gut permeability, where people can actually react to fruits and vegetables if they have a very damaged gut with an inflammatory response, which is why I think eliminating these, at least for a period of time before reintroducing them, to see how you feel is partly what makes the diet effective. The Lion Diet also is supposed to be an elimination diet to see what foods are causing reactions for you. Ideally, you can reintroduce foods after you do it and pinpoint what's causing issues. For me, it's still everything. But for lots of people, they don't stay on the Lion Diet after identifying the problematic foods. She doesn't mention that part of the diet, though. The author's a registered dietitian, instructor of nutrition at the Mayo Clinic, and lead dietitian for the Mayo Clinic diet. That's probably what they're feeling threatened about. It's a paid medical weight loss diet created by the Mayo Clinic that pushes the use of weight loss medications. And in her bio, just to top it off, she clarifies her dog really enjoys vegetables. Anyway, I find it incredibly irresponsible for the Mayo Clinic to publish an article with so much false information, and it's really unfortunate to see that an organization that's supposed to care about public health actively try to bury a diet that so many people who previously had debilitating untreated chronic diseases are healing with. To be clear, I'm not anti-doctor when you need it. Surgeons, huge fan of surgeons. They save people's lives. It's the diet and the chronic illness people that kind of irk me when they ignore the role of diet and act as if people are born sick and tell their patients there's nothing they can do about it, but take this medication. It comes with a host of side effects, and it doesn't really fix the problem. It's also very short-sighted to publish a hit piece given the current research being done on ketogenic diets. The end. Talk to you guys soon.